Hi, I'm Chris Whitaker. I'm the program director for all things wireless and IoT and mobility. And today we're going to focus on how these technologies and others impact the area of retail. I'm joined today with two of my colleagues, Brian and Jamal. You guys want to introduce yourselves?
Yeah, hey everybody, Brian Nelson here. I'm the National Cybersecurity Specialist for Intelisys. Thankful to hang out with Chris and Jamal this afternoon and looking forward to a great conversation on retail.
Hi, I'm Jamal Purvis, and I am the National Wireless and IoT Specialist. And once again, yeah, happy to be here to talk a little bit more about the retail space and how we can help.
So we're just going to have this general conversation and about how this technology is impacting this retail vertical. There's a lot of retail. When we say retail, we're talking distributive enterprise. Yes, it can even we're seeing small mom and pop kind of retailers joining the party here. But
Mm-hmm.
to kick us off, I'm going to go to you, Jamal, first. Across this retail landscape, how are you seeing wireless transformation, especially with 5G, reshape store operations, customer experience, and even workforce enablement?
Well, I would say, Chris, one of the things that I would say I've been in some shape or form in retail involved for over 20 years. My career started a long time ago, but working with companies like Best Buy and Apple, and just working in those environments, you can kind of see how retail was going from the old school of everything is a point of sale system at the front of the store, and had a whole bunch of lines to eventually move into like the Apple model where you have handheld devices that are being used for checkout mobile. And now, heck, in some stores like Apple actually has now, you can go in and check your own stuff out. Well, the reason why that works is because they've actually done a really good job by, basically making the experience inside the store, whether it be for Wi-Fi for guests or for cellular communication, when it comes to having it for primary use or even backup. And that's a good thing that people don't understand is, having a primary circuit, primary communication is great, but if you don't have a backup in place, that could cause some issues. But that's kind of like the transition we're seeing is everyone's moving into this mobile space because for most retail organizations, they don't really need to have this huge implementation of a big network and everything else because all they're doing is transferring POS data from a point of sale system right to the cloud or right to a server somewhere for the corporate office.
That is true, and, I'm thinking about some other stores that have inventory control systems where as soon as you
Yeah.
take a screwdriver off the shelf and you check out, the
Yeah.
system alerts the local warehouse, "Hey, we need another screwdriver delivered tonight," so they don't, have to worry about stocking it on site. And what about cutting the cord? I mean, have you seen a uptick in, especially small box retail, might be a
Mhm.
part of a larger chain, but as to your point, there's not a lot of heavy lifting there. You don't need a 1 gig symmetrical fiber circuit there.
Yeah.
We're seeing some big brands go all wireless, maybe dual 5G with a SD-WAN device. Any thoughts
Yeah.
on that?
Yeah, I think you hit it right on the head, right? It's the way companies are starting to approach it is okay, I'm spending a lot of money for connectivity here. I've got this infrastructure I got to maintain. I've got to have hire people to maintain that infrastructure for that network and everything else. Then I got to have another support team for the point of sale system. And now when you can convert all that down to maybe a simple point of sale device like a Square, right? I can use Square, put it on the desk. It connects to Wi-Fi. Well, my Wi-Fi is connected to just like you said, a router that has either a single SIM or a dual SIM. So if one goes down, the other carrier picks it up. Or they might even transition to having Starlink and using Starlink as a primary and cellular as a backup. That's still a great way for a company to reduce their costs, but still get the exact same kind of support and communication performance that they typically need.
Absolutely. Hey, so Brian, Jamal gave us some great insight on how 5G and wireless is impacting retail. When it comes to cybersecurity, what are you seeing?
Right. So, kind of like how Jamal answered, we're seeing organizations increase their footprint and decrease their footprint. Increase it by adding on things like IoT sensors, smart HVAC, smart refrigeration, maybe mobile POS, but also reduce it in some cases by eliminating internet connectivity altogether and just putting a SIM card in a POS device and calling it a day. This is how we're going to get connectivity to run transactions. The classic service that retail provides to their customers is guest Wi-Fi, right? And so as we consider these different elements in the retail space, to put it into cybersecurity terms, this is increasing the attack surface. And so is the customer aware of these new attack surfaces, and how are they addressing it? The classic control for this is network segmentation, or VLANing, kind of traditionally, which is a starting point that every retail organization needs to have figured out. Their guest Wi-Fi, for example, should not be able to interact with the same network that transmits transaction data, right? But at the same time, as organizations reduce their network footprint at the store, right? How are you going to segment that traffic when it's coming in directly over 5G? And the newer control is called network slicing, and it's available through the carrier services to segment that traffic specifically off. And so I'm seeing operations, it increases the attack surface, but it also transforms the attack surface depending on how the organization is approaching the challenge of transmitting transaction data over networks.
Brian actually brought up a great point. So the physical security side of things, right, with smart cameras, right? When we start talking about AI cameras, and the convergence of a camera have to be connected to a switch, which is connected to a LAN, and go out and transmit all that data. Now we're seeing manufacturers bring in a camera that's connected with a smart SIM or an LTE SIM. And whether it's one that they put together into an enclosure and is basically used for monitoring traffic outside, or basically being a deterrent for any kind of things that can happen in the parking lot, or they're actually starting to be used, especially the camera system themselves, being used for productivity. We already knew that they use them for like heat mapping, and this type of heat mapping is typically done for a lot of companies. I know Best Buy did it for end cap management. And what that is of course, Sony, one of the big manufacturers who pays for their TVs sitting on the end of an end cap, will pay X dollars to Best Buy to put their TV on the front. And basically, that's to encourage that TV to get sold. And the best way of figuring out if Sony's making their money is to put a AI vision camera there that's actually looking at traffic and seeing how many people stop there, how many people stop and watch the game that's playing, or the trailers that are being shown on that TV, and then they can match that to the sales of that same SKU. And if Sony sees that, okay, when we have that end cap, we sell 30% to 20% more of that particular model, it's beneficial. But on the other hand, if another company like a TCL pays for that same end cap and they see a loss, then it makes sense for us to move on to position something else. And that's where the AI vision is now starting to go beyond just end cap management to, helping to reduce shrink, which is of course loss of product, also helping to help with productivity around line management, holiday season. You know, when's the last time you went to a Black Friday fun day and got trampled at, Best Buy? Hardly ever, just because they don't do that. And that's because they learn from their line management cues and things around it, that they typically use that vision to help build a better model so they can pass it on to all their stores.
Fantastic. And kind of going back to that 5G, another thought I had that I meant to mention, you mentioned the large discount stores. We'll leave it at that, right? The big box discount stores. Something it's been going on for probably over a decade, but there's sub stores inside there, right? There's
Yeah,
optometry, there's a nail salon, there's eyeglasses, and they're all independent companies. And guess what? Walmart or Target, whomever, they don't want them on their network, so they got to bring in their own networks, and that's
yep,
usually where that 5G can come into play.
that's
And,
true.
and yeah, and you mentioned AI. Let's pull that string a little bit more. Brian, any thoughts around how you're seeing AI having an impact on retail and the security space as well?
There's kind of like two sides of the AI coin as it relates to cybersecurity. There's cybersecurity for AI, so using cybersecurity controls to mitigate risk represented in the processing of data in an artificial intelligence solution. But then the other side of the coin is AI for cybersecurity, using artificial intelligence to optimize your cybersecurity controls and to make them more effective, right? And so if we take those kind of one at a time, cybersecurity for AI. Okay, let's take that end cap example that Jamal gave just a moment ago. So it's camera feeds, you got to process that data. The most efficient place to process that data would be on site. And we'd refer to that as edge computing, right? And so instead of having to ship your camera feeds somewhere else for processing, the fastest, most efficient way to process that information be right at the edge, right? And so how are you going to secure that processing? Because for the AI to apply computer vision to understand what it's looking at, and then to provide what remediation or suggestions for the most effective product to place on that end cap, it's going to have to do an API call out somewhere else, unless you're using a very lightweight model, which there's not a ton of right now, but it is a certainly growing space. So how are you going to secure all of that, right? And when we're looking at the data uh, as it's being processed at the edge, the key kind of controls there are a secure AI gateway, and perhaps, depending on what exactly is being processed, may not be applicable in the NCAP example, but a network-based DLP interception, so that what is being passed out to the AI for processing is properly secured and in line with PCI compliance. On the other side of the coin is artificial intelligence for cybersecurity controls. And this is baking in artificial intelligence to traditional cybersecurity controls, like a security operations center equipped with a security incident event management solution uses AI to look at the events that are generated and then provide proper uh, attestation for, is this a false positive, or more deadly, a false negative, right? Um,
Hmm.
and then also some remediation steps. And then some of the new, more agentic solutions are actually implementing those remediation steps in an automated way. But other things could be user entity behavior analysis. So you're not just looking at what's going on this particular end cap, but what's going on in the store at large. Is there something that's potentially dangerous to the organization happening? Or are your checkout people acting ethically, right?
Yeah.
Um, and so there's kind of two sides to the coin. And that
Yeah.
that is kind of larger response than retail, but it's certainly what relevant in retail.
Yeah. Chris, I like what Brian was just talking about, and I want to hit on one thing he mentioned, that checkout side, right? A lot of shrink occurs at checkout. A lot of things walk out right at checkout. And it's the reason why the companies who put in self checkout are now ripping it out, because a lot of things walked out, and you didn't have the data to prove it. But to Brian's point, if I've got the cameras there that actually can do 60 frames per second, and it's monitoring every single transaction, every time someone swipes something, scans something, or whatever, even if the person is standing there monitoring that area and they miss it, that camera can then tell them they missed this, basically with the knowledge of that AI solution, putting everything together into a nice format to where at the end of the day or end of the week, they get a full, recap of what went on, what inventory was sold, and what inventory was none accounted for because it didn't get checked off correctly or scanned correctly. So
Yes.
Brian brought up a good point. Then I thought that was a great use of, hey, AI is definitely being used, and these are other ways that are going to reduce your shrink.
A big part of checkout is collecting money. Let's kind
Yeah.
of pivot to point of sale. I mean, and not only in point of sale, but it's almost hard to go to a restaurant or even these big box retailers. And now start to see small box, even mom and pops. It's a device. It's maybe a mobile device, a handheld thing, a Zebra, Toast, a Clover. A couple of thoughts here, right? Somehow or another, you have to manage that wireless connection, and then there's
Mhm.
a security concern, right? I mean, where's that data going? How is it secured? Any thoughts there, Jamal, on what you're seeing in the area of point of sale and securing and managing devices?
Yeah, I think years ago when Square and a couple other alternatives to Square. I remember if you guys remember, PayPal had their own payment
Yeah.
center that you could use,
Yeah.
right? Those are all little devices you plug into a phone and you check out, right? It was cashless. It was easy swipe, or then eventually became tap and tap and pin now. And I think the elevation of that has moved people away from, just taking cash in general, because that's a one way of reducing people breaking in and or getting held up at gas stations and stuff like that, because it's less cash on hand. So it's less of that happening. I think the 5G element of it makes it a lot easier. Just think about when it comes to here in the Carolinas during Hurricane Helene. My biggest talking point around this whole scenario was after that aftermath of the storm coming through. If you went to go get gas and you didn't have cash, none of these guys had any cellular or any kind of communication working, because they didn't have a backup. They relied on what was up and running before, but of course the storm damaged lines, all kind of place, all over the place.
Flowers, in
So
some
you couldn't
cases.
do anything, right? Yeah, you were reduced to not having any kind of way to take payments. Now coming out of that, we've seen an uptick in those companies saying, "I need to have a backup solution, whether it just be from my network, or maybe I do need to start having mobile operations to where I can take payments with a device that stays connected with a cellular carrier."
Yep. It's irresponsible. I mean, I used to kind of be shy about saying it, but no, it's
Yeah.
irresponsible to have a business relying on people giving you money and you not have a wireless backup. It's 50, $75 max normally. But
Yeah.
yeah, when that internet's down for an hour or a week, how much you're losing a lot more than $50. So yeah, yeah. If you're
Yeah.
listening, you have retail customers, you could almost argue anybody that relies on communication, wireless is just a part of the network. It's not optional, I don't feel like. Um, Kind of pivoting just a little bit, kind of in general, thinking about technology deployments. What are some common pitfalls you see that organizations that are managing large multi-site retail environments? What are some common pitfalls and maybe some best practices to avoid those pitfalls?
Coming from a cybersecurity lens, right? One of the pitfalls I've seen organizations fall into is interpreting their risk solely through the lens of PCI, when the risk to the organization actually is much larger than the context of PCI.
Mm.
And so, you've got the PCI auditor staring at you, and I have to be able to answer those questions. And so that gets bubbled up, right, in priority. But the risks addressed by PCI may not address the total corporate risk. And so it's a mistake for retailers to think, if I've taken care of PCI, my organization is secure and I've properly mitigated risk. That's a piece of the puzzle, but it's not the whole thing. Another one that I've seen in the retail space, especially like large scale retail, is inconsistency in deploying hardware, right? There's a lot of tech debt out there.
Good
There's
point.
inconsistent, non standard hardware deployed. And what that leads to is inconsistent policy enforcement, right? And then configuration drift, because you're not all on a single platform. You've got multiple portals you have to manage. And what that does is it makes the overhead of managing your store environment so much larger than it needs to be. I can sit here as a consultant and say, yeah, this is what you ought to do. Go do it. I know that that reality is much, much more difficult, because, these stores, they have legacy equipment, right? That
Mm.
maybe they don't want to make the financial investment in updating, or they have local contractors, like especially thinking in like a franchised environment, right? Where the
Yeah.
franchise is allowed to source a lot of different things that maybe in a corporate owned style of a retailer, the corporation would control, this is what you do for cameras or switches and wireless access points. And when that franchisor is allowed to build their network, right? It opens up just a different layer of risk, right? And so standardization is king, but it's harder than you think it is.
So
Man,
you,
Brian hit some great call outs. I think that's a big one. And I was recently talking to a company who wasn't standardized. They didn't have like they had a hodgepodge of stuff out there. So and I think that's a great point. And I think for me, one of the things that um especially retail organizations can't forget is really securing the environment. So it's still a security thing. When we're talking, physical security, video surveillance, stuff like that. And reason why I say that just because it could be weaponized against you as an organization if you forget to just do certain things, right? Monitoring the area around the if you're a restaurant, for instance, around it, like take a fast food restaurant, and you're monitoring when people mop the floors and they put the sign up. Did they put the sign up?
Mm,
This could reduce lawsuits, right? Frivolous lawsuits, because someone might say, "Oh, I slipped and fell," and realistically, they didn't slip and fall, but you don't have footage of that to prove it. And unfortunately,
it happened a
it
month
puts it out
ago, right? It happened a month
there.
ago. It's going to go
Yeah,
through a month of, yeah, you could go back 4 weeks. You still got to go through
yep,
24 hours of footage. Yeah, but to your point with AI, man, it alerts someone
yeah,
right away, timestamps it, sends a clip to the manager, and they
yep.
know real time, what
And
happened.
they can store it in the cloud forever, right?
That's
So
right.
if 90 days down the road, someone comes back and tries to bring up oh yeah, I had this time. What day was it? I could pull it right up. Yeah, I see you walk right in the store and this what happened. And yeah, show me where you fell because you walked right out and nothing happened. There's a lot of things that if we dive deep into the physical security aspect of it, it's a combination of adding that surveillance for just that surveillance, but also securing the environment, protecting your employees, protecting your patrons, and to Brian's point, really helping to enhance that cyber side because those clips and elements of who and what and when and where can be tied into an AI infrastructure. So now I build a full picture of if someone badged in with a badge to open up the store, I know everything that they did from the time they walked in to the time they closed that night. So
mm.
those little things are things we can't forget.
One other thought I had was around network segmentation, kind of to come back to one of my previous points, but at a larger scale, right? Your corporate network needs to be truly segmented, not just VLANed, like
Mhm.
a separate network than your store's network, because the stores represent the most risk, right? And
Right.
what you would not want is corporate risk being exposed at the store. And so you don't want your a store get compromised, their network get compromised, and all of a sudden your corporate network is compromised. So the proper control there is a true like air gapped separate networks
Yeah.
that are completely autonomous from each other.
Real quick on that point, what's a good
Yeah.
discovery question that a technology architect could ask to maybe uncover that issue or that concern? How would you phrase it for a discovery meeting?
Yeah, something along the lines of could you outline your topology between your stores and your corporate networks? Especially if you're in the context of providing network connectivity or internet services, it's a relevant question to ask to make sure that proper connectivity is made and to the organization as a whole.
Fantastic points. We've covered a lot here. So as we wrap up, I'm gonna call this the rapid fire session. Each of you, one or two questions here, kind of a quick answer, short answer. Um, Jamal, for retail, what's one of the most common solutions you're having the most conversations about?
Backup, easily backup.
So Brian, when it comes to security of the data and the network, who do I talk to?
So when there's no CISO, cybersecurity is typically run by IT, and I would work with a VP of IT or a IT director, someone at that level. Probably a VP of IT is when I run into customers without a
Uh,
cybersecurity dedicated resource. It's a VP of IT and cyber kind of combo position.
Perfect, perfect. And last rapid fire question for Jamal. Tech refresh times for retail. Typically, what time frames are we looking at for companies to tech refresh their devices or their hardware?
I would say most companies are probably going to start doing it sometime in the January, February. They'll start like planning it. and then sometime before early and midsummer. Most retail, I would say, big box retail, maybe 10 years. Small box retail, maybe every 3 to 5 years. It just
Yeah.
depends on what they've got.
And I asked that question as a setup here. I would agree. I mean, I think, sometimes as soon as 3 years for certain
Mhm.
devices, because by the way, let's face it, with AI is changing everything. In 3 years,
Yeah.
what you buy today is really going to be outdated. It's going to be,
Yeah.
definitely old technology. But we're seeing the LTE network in the next 3 to 5 years is going to be decommissioned, just much like we saw with 2G and 3G. So there's a lot
Yep.
of wireless backup devices out there that are LTE radios only. So if they
3G LTE. Yeah, exactly.
That's
Or
right.
4G
So
LTE. Excuse me.
as these LTE networks go away, these devices are the even 4G is starting to be
Mhm.
degraded somewhat, but LTE definitely is starting to be degraded. So it's a good opportunity to do a tech refresh. If they say they already have wireless backup, ask them how long they had it, because
Yep.
chances are those radios are gonna just the performance is just slowly just degrade and get worse and worse. So thanks, guys. I think we covered a lot around how, again, probably just scratched the surface. I think there's more. We didn't even really get into fleet tracking, because all these retail stores,
Oh, yeah.
things delivered, they have their own trucks in most
Yeah.
cases. And there's
Asset
there's
tracking.
technology
Yep.
alerting the warehouse. Hey, by the way, the truck's 30 minutes away. Get the crew ready to offload the truck, instead of the truck sitting there for 3 hours while they have somebody come in. So a lot of good stuff there. Thanks so much. Definitely check out my Intelisys. Talk to your regional BDM, your regional sales engineer, and of course the Center of Excellence, the four pillars of advanced technology we're here to serve as well. So thanks for your time and happy selling.
Thanks,
Thanks,
Chris.
everyone.